Why is my drawing not improving? Well, the frustratingly simple but truthful answer is because nothing's changing. I'm drawing the same way over and over again. Improvement, by its very definition, is change. When I improve, I'm not doing things the same as I did them before. But we're not just talking about random change, shutting my eyes, drawing with my non-dominant hand, using a red pen. These things aren't going to improve my drawing. It's focused change, targeted change. Now, if I have a drawing teacher or if I'm doing a course, then these should be stepping me through change in a measured, appropriate, interesting way. Appropriate for my experience, for where I'm at now, and using that as my starting point, but building on that. But if I don't have those things, if I'm on a self-taught learning journey, how can I improve? Let me share what worked for me in that situation. The truth is, I'll have to create this change for myself. Now, it doesn't mean I have to make everything up. It will almost certainly involve my finding resources, finding input, maybe finding videos to watch. But I'll have to choose what's going to be helpful, what's going to be appropriate, and what's going to be the right time to use this input. But let's not rush to do that, because there are more important things that need to be done first if I want to set myself on a path to drawing improvement. And after I've explained some of the things you might identify as areas of weakness that you might like to change, I'll also share some of the things that I identified in my work over the last 3 years that I wanted to change, that I very consciously identified, targeted, and focused on in my drawing. And I'll also explain just in a nutshell the things I did to change how my drawings looked in regard to those things. So if you're interested in how I think I've improved in the last 3 years of drawing, don't miss that. And the important question to ask at the start of this process is, why do I want to improve? Now, this isn't a big picture question. This isn't so that I can become an artist and sell lots of work. This is, when I look at my drawings, what do I see that makes me think I want to improve? I need to improve. What am I not happy with how my drawings look? And therefore, what am I going to have to change? What am I going to have to consider about finding appropriate, systematic, targeted areas to change in? Now, I do this both by looking at my drawings and really focusing on the things that I can see aren't working. And they may be very specific things, such as my line work is all fuzzy, or they may be quite general things, such as no matter how many details I put in my drawings, they look boring. But the more specifically I can find things that I'm not happy with, the easier it's going to be to focus, to target the changes I'm going to have to make to improve. But it's not just looking at my drawings to see what am I not happy with. It's also, I think, very helpful to look at the drawings of other people and to think, well, what do I wish in their drawings were happening in my drawings? If these drawings don't have the issues that I feel weigh down my drawings, why not? What are they doing differently? Again, because this is going to help me focus to target more specifically, not just the changes I'm going to make, but how I might make them. Here are some ideas of things to consider when I look at my drawings of things that perhaps aren't working the way I would like, things I would like to improve on. Now, it may be that it's obvious to me that my perspective doesn't look right. Even if I'm not sure why, I can tell that it doesn't look right. Perhaps my trees don't look right. Perhaps they just don't look like trees at all. Do my drawings somehow look flat, look very two-dimensional, even when the scenes I'm drawing actually have quite a lot of depth in them? Do I have stiff, very wooden line work? Do I have a problem with really heavy outlines around the major subjects in my drawing? Do my drawings end up looking more like cartoons than the sense of realism I want them to have? Have I struggled with proportion? Are people's heads too large for their bodies? Are the cars too large or too small for the road that they're on? Are the doors too large for the windows? And so forth. Do I have trouble fitting my drawing onto the paper? Does it go off, or is it all over to one side when I wanted it to be in the middle? Are my straight lines not as straight as I need them to be? Do my shadows somehow not look real? Do they look like someone's painted them on with black ink? Or do they just not look like shadows at all? Do I have a problem with hatching, with cross hatching? Do I get confused about what to do and how to do it, what angles? Does it end up just attracting attention to itself instead of being part of the overall scene? Does my drawing just look boring? You might notice that some of these things are very specific. Some of them are to do with what we'd call certain drawing techniques. Some of them are to do with individual subjects. And some of them are really quite big picture things. When we're bullet pointing what we want to see change in our drawing, it doesn't matter what we write down. The more things we write down, the more focused we can be in starting to cause this change to happen. But it's not just identifying what the weaknesses are. The more we can actually understand what's really not working in our drawing in that respect at the moment, then the easier it's going to be to step into the right direction with the sorts of changes we're going to make. In a general sense, we may have seen all of these issues with our drawing for a long time, but we may not really have worked hard at considering exactly what's wrong with it. And if I've got some of these drawings that I've been looking at to work out what's wrong with my work, drawings that inspire me by looking the way I'd like my drawings to look, then this will help me identify more clearly what I'm doing wrong. Because it's not just in all likelihood that I have to form new habits, new ways of drawing in a way that's going to create the drawings I want, but I'm also going to have to let go of perhaps some bad habits, some inadequate ways of approaching my drawing that I've got very used to doing. And that may be hard. So the more I can understand exactly what I'm doing wrong, the easier it's going to be to stop doing that in those ways. And that opens the door for the change that I'm wanting to do, for the improvement that I'm hoping to have. And if you're finding this interesting, finding it helpful, please help me out and hit the like button for me. And why not share this video with a friend who you know is struggling to improve in their drawing as well. So, as I mentioned earlier, when I looked at my drawings over the last, say, 3 years, what were the things that I identified? What were the things that, when I critiqued my drawings, as I encourage you to do, because it's such a productive way to improve, what were the things I saw that I thought, this isn't working for me in the way that I would like? How can I improve on this? How can I change this? How can I somehow capture more what, in at least some vague sense, I've got in my head or that I've seen other people do? Because this process of working towards improvement, of requiring continual change, never ends if I want to keep improving. I'm never going to reach the point where there's no more I can do to inject more creativity, more of whatever it is I'm wanting to achieve in my work into my drawing. And it's an incredibly productive habit to be in with my drawing. Well, at least it has been for me. And if it has been for me, I can't see any reason why it couldn't work this way for you if you want it to. Now, these points aren't the only things I've focused on to improve my drawing, but some of them are quite specific, and some of them are big picture, and some of them are something in between. So in no particular order, here they are. Now, my perspective has always been a stronger point for me, but I did realize that I was less confident when the ground sloped up or sloped down. Basically, I've always focused on copying what's in the reference, but I still struggled a bit. And I thought that if I could understand more the theory of perspective when the ground isn't level, that it would help me. And it certainly did. And it also gave me a couple of videos, how to draw perspective when the ground slopes upward and how to draw perspective when the ground slopes downward. I was unhappy that my lines to me, while they were, if you like, accurately drawn, the perspective was correct, the buildings were in proportion, that somehow they were quite stiff and wooden. And this to me meant they lacked interest. The overall scene was, in a sense, harder to see, and it just wasn't as interesting to look at. Some of the things I changed were these. I began to draw different lines in different parts of the drawing at different speeds. I began to hold my pen in different places. I began to use different pens in the one drawing. I stopped drawing so many lines, at least continuous lines. I wasn't happy with the way many of my edges looked. I felt that they didn't capture the realism, the sense of reality that we get with those edges when we look at them in life. There was too much continuous line that created the same effect, the same visual effect, the way things looked. Made them all look as if they were all the same thing made of the same material. I wanted to capture the differences. Often the things I was drawing were old or far away, were in poor condition. So I began to use a lot more marks rather than lines. But even more importantly, I didn't feel the need to have ink continuously running along every edge. I began to see the value of actually leaving gaps between the ink marks I was creating, which when combined with the marks I put on, did create the visual effect, the feel of the object in those conditions. At one stage, I was unhappy that I felt that my drawings looked a bit flat. Even though I had ways of creating the effect of 3 dimensions, I still felt it didn't always work as well as I would have liked. How I changed this was I stopped thinking of shapes to copy and began to try and firstly visualize a 3-dimensional form, if not in my reference, in the reality that the reference represents, so that I could then try and draw that visualized 3-dimensional form and whatever direction the surface was, whether it was coming towards me, moving away from me, how the lighting affected it, and so forth. All the things that make 3-dimensional things feel 3-dimensional when we look at them in life. And it wasn't just the actual objects I discovered, but it was how I drew the things behind these objects also had an impact on how 3-dimensional they looked. I wanted more realism, and so I stopped seeing things in terms of objects and surfaces and began to see, again, try to visualize in terms of the visual effect, how something looked rather than what it was. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but it revolutionized my thinking, and our thinking is always the starting point of our creativity, and in this case, of our drawing. It was also the fuller understanding that the effect of something, how it looks, changes when the conditions of the object and the conditions under which we view it change. And therefore there really was no one way to draw anything. It was always, how do I draw this thing with how it looks here? I began to draw natural bushland scenes, but I felt that they were just a tangle, and so much of the time it was hard to work out what was happening in them. So I began to work hard at identifying various depths of plane and making choices about the marks I would make, how I would make them, what I would make them with, according to those depths of plane. I also paid much more attention to the direction of my marks, so that I could sometimes change direction of particularly hatching, not so much to create shadow or shade or the local color, but as much as that to produce clarity with the objects that were around it, taking into account the direction of hatching or simply the direction of lines I'd done already. And another problem I began to think I was having in my drawing as I critiqued them was too many midtones, too much of a sameness whether I was deliberately hatching or simply had a lot of lines close together because of the detail I was drawing, that visually it was too much of the same. The effect was a certain sameness of value across a lot of the drawing, a lot of the paper. Now, the obvious answer to this is to work harder at having less value in some areas and darker values in other areas to increase the contrast. The problem was, I found this very hard to do. This so much wasn't a technique difficulty as a personality difficulty. It somehow, for some illogical reason, felt too nerve-wracking, too risky to go so dark and so light. And yet I was so focused on doing it, I began to even choose some subjects that would particularly push me to do it, that would demand I go darker and lighter in the one drawing close together than I ever had before if I was going to make a drawing of this subject that worked. But my focus was simply to bite the bullet and not give in to my fear of somehow going too extreme, and learning to go darker and then learning to appreciate the possibilities this opened up for more interesting drawings. I actually think my drawings have changed a lot in the last 3 years. But it's only happened because I've tried to work out what wasn't working as well as I wanted it to. And then I focused my energy into finding out anything I needed to find out. I began to find subjects that required me to make the changes I was needing to make so that I could explore how to make them. And of course, my habit of experimenting with mark making for a couple of minutes with some element of the drawing that I think might be challenging before I start the actual drawing was invaluable in doing this. Again, I encourage you to do the things that for me have revolutionized my drawing practice and have actually sped up, I'm sure, my drawing improvement. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. If you're wanting to improve your drawing, then I hope some of these thoughts and some of the strategies and some of the quite specific ideas have been helpful in helping you make the changes you need to make to see improvement in your drawing. If you look at some of my most recent drawings, I hope you'll be able to see that the sorts of issues I've talked about wanting to work on myself have been things I've worked on. And when compared with the drawings I made, say, 3 years ago for my first YouTube videos, there is a very noticeable difference. I hope you think it's been an improving difference. But hey, in the end, whatever we're drawing, however we're drawing it, let's make sure we still have fun. I certainly am. I'll see you next time. Bye.